Welcome to Equal Ground Headlines. I am Samuel B. Williams, bringing you balanced coverage on our top stories of the day. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is proposing an extraordinary plan to end the conflict in Ukraine, put the country under a temporary international administration, and hold new elections. Speaking at a forum in Murmansk, Putin suggested that a UN-mandated interim authority involving the US, European nations, and Russia could take over in Kyiv to facilitate fresh elections and peace talks. It's a proposal that effectively questions the legitimacy of Ukraine's current government and President Zelensky, who has stayed in power beyond his original term due to the war. Putin's comments, reported by Russian news agencies early Friday, outline a path where Ukraine's governance would be overseen by outside powers for a period of time. In principle, a temporary administration could be introduced in Ukraine under the auspices of the UN, the United States, European countries, and our partners. Putin said, envisioning this as a prelude to democratic elections that would bring what he calls a capable government to power. Only then, he argued, could serious peace negotiations begin. This idea ties directly into Putin's long-standing narrative. Iron forks. For years, he has derided Ukraine's leaders as puppets and extremists, especially after Zelensky postponed the 24 elections due to the ongoing invasion. By suggesting an interim regime, Putin is effectively saying he won't negotiate with Zelensky, but he might with a new leadership installed through an international process. It's a bold gambit that would sideline Ukraine's current elected authorities in favor of something arguably more palatable to Moscow. The Kremlin's rationale is that extraordinary measures are needed because normal peace talks have failed. Notably, Putin praised US President Donald Trump's approach, saying the new American leader sincerely wants an end to the conflict. Unlike former President Biden, who avoided direct talks with Moscow, Trump has engaged, even floating a 30-day ceasefire, which Putin rebuffed, and dispatching envoys to meet Russian officials. Putin seems to view Trump as someone willing to lean on Kyiv. In Murmansk, he pointed out that any deal would only stick if Washington orders Zelensky to comply, given what he called the sad experience of past agreements that Kyiv allegedly violated. It's unclear how Trump or other Western leaders have reacted to Putin's temporary administration concept. Publicly, there's been no endorsement of the idea of ousting Ukraine's government, even temporarily. Such a move would be seen by many in the West, and certainly by Ukrainians, as rewarding Russian aggression. It echoes historical precedents that alarm Ukraine, reminiscent of Cold War-era partition solutions or the Russian-controlled regimes in occupied Ukrainian territories. For Putin, however, the proposal costs nothing to float. Domestically, he's signaling openness to peace on his terms. He coupled it with familiar reassurances. Russia, he said, favors resolving conflicts through peaceful means, but not at our expense. And on the battlefield, he bragged that Russian forces still hold the strategic initiative across the front. In other words, Moscow won't agree to anything that looks like a defeat. It's important to note Putin's claim that over 3 years of war have been moving Russia toward its goals. a signal that he sees this temporary administration idea as achieving what force alone hasn't. Additionally, Putin mentioned Russia's openness to work with various countries, even North Korea, to help end the war. Western officials say North Korea has already sent thousands of troops or volunteers to bolster Russia's ranks, a point Moscow hasn't confirmed. For war-weary observers, Putin's plan might sound like a non-starter, essentially asking Ukraine to surrender sovereignty to a committee that includes its invader. Kyiv has not directly responded yet, but Zelensky has repeatedly rejected any negotiations that undermine Ukraine's democracy or territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Trump's administration has been quiet on the record, though U.S. envoys have acknowledged Putin's apparent eagerness to end the war on Russia's terms. In sum, Putin is dangling a ceasefire idea that on the surface involves international cooperation, but in practice would sideline Ukraine's elected leaders. It's a dramatic proposal that underscores how far apart the warring sides remain. The coming weeks will show if this idea gains any traction, or if it's dismissed outright by Ukraine and its allies as an unacceptable concession to Kremlin pressure.